Yeah, welcome to our T4G series of talks. I'm Jacqueline. I'm currently an intern helping out for Tech for Good. I'll be your host for today. So we're excited to have Greg with us today. He'll be sharing more about how we can use our mindsets and methods to include and enable everyone through design. So before we begin, we'd like to inform you that there will be a Q&A session at the end of the talk. So please do type any questions you may have pertaining to today's session in the Q&A tab below. I will address your questions later during the Q&A session, to Greg during the Q&A session. So more about Greg. Greg is an award-winning inclusive design specialist, keynote speaker, author, and disability advocate with 30 years experience across education, community, commercial, and government contexts. So I'm sure everyone is bored of me talking, so I will get started. Over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks, Ken. Alrighty, so thank you everyone for attending. We're going to talk about diversity as a design requirement. So what I've got on the screen is a series of images. I have the inside of the front of a car, so we're seeing the bucket seats. We're seeing a footpath with a curb cut, a Microsoft game controller, an OXO Good Grip vegetable peeler, the Gillette Trio shaver, a D-lock door handle, and a set of Apple AirPod Pros. Now, what do these products share in common? If we look at the car seats, and as some of you may be able to notice, my facial hair and what hair I do have left is white, so I'm in my 60s now. I can remember a time when our car seats were bench seats in the cars and they were fixed. Now, bucket seats, they allow us to cater for different leg lengths and different arm lengths of people. Think about our curb cuts on our roads. Here in Australia, we got those in about 1980, 81. They allowed a person with a physical disability to independently get across the road. Adding the tactile indicators also supported people with vision impairment. But we've all benefited from that good design because there are people with shopping trolleys or strollers or work people or people on push bikes or skateboards that have all benefited. The Microsoft Adaptive Game Controller has allowed people with physical disabilities to participate in gaming. The OXO Good Grip vegetable peeler is really important. The owner of the company, his wife, could not use a normal vegetable peeler, the little thin plastic ones, because of limitations she had with her hands, with carpal tunnel and some arthritis. So something with a soft, easy grip was easy for her to hold and manipulate. We've all benefited from those designs. They're much safer. The Gillette Trio is the first disposable razor that was designed for a carer to shave the person that they are looking after. The tube holds the gel. Being able to do everything with one hand means that you can use your other hand to support the person. The D-lock door handle is really important because if it was a door knob, we would have lateral movement of our hands, where here that lever action allows us to use not only our hand, but other parts of our body to open the door. In Australia, the D handle is a default design requirement under our national building standards. And the AirPod Pros, I should say, are the latest piece of innovation, and I love these. Why? Because I can turn on live listen on my iPhone, and it means that if we were in a noisy restaurant, I can put it on the other side of the table there, and it will use the microphone within the iPhone to transmit the conversation to my AirPods. The same as if I turn on Conversation Boost within my AirPod Pros, what it will enable me to do is pick up the conversation a lot better around me, even with the iPhone in my pocket. So it's really good inclusive design. We also start to see it in things such as Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Office, where we can do a live listen. We can also go in and do dictation or have things read aloud. And of course, all the inbuilt accessibility features on your iPhone and your iPad as an example. What do they all share? Well, guess what? They've all recognized that there was an exclusion point. They've learnt from edge users and the diversity of those edge users, and then they've solved for one and extended to many to create products that are essential for some and useful for all. So they've recognized exclusion, learnt from the edge users, and solve for one, extend to many. In that process, the research has shown when they think of people who have a permanent disability first, they actually reach an audience size of 3 to 4 times larger than what they are originally designing for. And that's absolutely crucial. It shows that there is a significant business case for designing for a diverse need of users front up. What's done for everybody? Well, recognizing that our diverse users are natural and expected, we've provided people independent access, we've given them equitable access and dignity and satisfaction. We've created a great customer experience because we've thought about that diversity of need. I've shown you some great examples there, but it's not the current state in a lot of cases. So when we do an analysis, and this is some of Microsoft's research, what we're looking at is that if people don't design inclusively, what we're seeing is that only about 22% of the population like and use the current design. There's about another 16% that start to have some difficulty and don't like using it. A whopping 37% of people who find a moderate difficulty in using that design don't like it. And there's another significant 25% that are excluded from using that design. And that's the problem where people make assumptions. They make assumptions about their customers. Those assumptions limit their thinking. They have low awareness of different tools and techniques. And so they see accessibility as a nice to have, not as a must have. And if accessibility is thought about, it's only thought about as a final phase quality assurance. If you've got that approach, then your product is not being used well by people and it's not reaching a wide audience. Let's look at why people get it wrong. They make, as I said, those assumptions about our customers. Think about the diversity here is the norm. It's not the exception. You can see a huge array of different ears here on screen. Some have hearing aids, some have a cochlear implant, some have some colorful ear decoration. They're all of different sizes and shapes and colors. If that is the diversity of our ears, imagine what the diversity between our ears is like. But the key thing is that diversity is the norm. It's not the exception. And that our backgrounds are rich and diverse. Think about the differences we've got in age or gender identity, race, ethnicity, sexuality, physical attributes, cognitive attributes, whether you have a permanent, temporary or situational disability, your language, your culture, religion, education, and your social and economic context. Now, that's a really important one because sometimes you will see security questions and I'll say, what was the model of your first car or of your first job? Now that's presuming that you own a car or that you've got a job. Those sorts of biases need to be removed in everything that we design. The other thing is that no one is average. Now on the screen, I've got 2 comparisons. The first one has 2 males of different heights and body shapes. You can be low, average, or higher than average in think about height, weight, your arm reach, your torso size, your shoulder width, your chest width, your waist, hips, and leg length. It becomes even more so when you start to think about the differences in your cognitive capability, memory, language, knowledge, reading, your vocab, your curiosity, your perceptual capability, your cognitive capability, your interest, your social and sensory awareness. Now, for me, who I'm passionate about Irish whiskey, I'm also passionate about dark chocolate. So my memory and language, all of those attributes would be average to higher than average on those. If it was about algebraic equations, it would be down in the lower than average area. And that's the thing, you might be high in some, low in others, but no one is average. And everyone encounters barriers. We use a simple formula: disability equals impairment plus barriers. This is the social model of disability. And so you go through a range of permanent disabilities, temporary impairment, and situational limitations. So when you think about it, you could have somebody who is permanently deaf, has a temporary impairment through an ear infection, or they might have a situational impairment where that they are deaf in a noisy hotel. All of those three things take us along that spectrum. And so it doesn't matter whether it's from touch or sight or hearing or speech or any other attribute, there is that spectrum of permanent, temporary, and situational. Now, that's absolutely crucial because it makes us realize that it has a bigger impact than we think. Now, there is a US data at the moment. This is from their previous census data. It says that at the moment, there are 26,000 people in the United States who have a permanent loss of one arm. There are 13 million people that have a temporary loss of one arm. And there are 8 million people who have a situational impairment. They are nursing a child and as new parents trying to do things with one arm. Guess what? Fix it for the 26,000 and 21 million benefit. That's a huge return on investment. And so when we talk about earlier on that 3 to 4 times larger market size, we start to see it because we're reaching people who have a temporary impairment and situational limitations, not only people who have a permanent disability. The other thing is that everyone experiences a disability. If you live long enough, everybody will experience a disability. This is on some Australian data here. We have 1 in 5, or roughly in our population, based on our definition of disability, that has a permanent disability. Under the age of 18, it's about 1 in 9 people. But we recognise that as people age, it's in that late 30s, early 40s, we start to see wear and tear in the body. Our short and long focal length changes, as an example. At the age of 55, it's 1 in 3 people. At the age of 67, which is the retirement age here in Australia, 1 in 2 people will have a permanent disability. As an example, a 60-year-old person is able to see light at about 1/3 of the level of what a 20-year-old does. That's because the size of their pupils decrease and the thickness of the lens in their eye thickens as well. So when you start to think about it, you might notice that the behaviours of older family members or older friends, they've got stronger lights, they might not go out at night as much. There's a whole range of change of behaviours, and that's to do with age-related eye conditions. But it means that, yes, everyone experiences a disability, and particularly as they age. What does it mean for us? It means that our decisions require empathy. We must understand our customer needs. We must have the humility of thought to challenge our assumptions. And that comes down to, no, you don't represent normal. There is no such thing as normal in there. And you've got to be open to new ideas and practices that afford dignity and respect. And really, that's what we want. We want to afford people that dignity of independence and equitable access. Well, what can we do about this? What can we do as designers? So we've looked at our mindsets. We now need to look at our methods. We must move the whole idea of diversity and accessibility up to front. It is a concept that we use right there when we're coming up with our designs. We've got to say, I've got to be aware of all these diverse needs, and I've got to think about that as part of the design process. It goes all the way through to quality assurance before I release my product. So in that design requirement, it means I'm going to potentially co-design. I'm going to go and talk to potential users. I'm going to get some advice about what their needs are. If it's a digital product, if I'm building something that is web-based or mobile-based, the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, in other words, WCAG, that's our digital building code. And it offers design guidance to us as well as our testable standards. Now, it's in about 37 different languages. Here in Australia, what we talk about is that a product is only deemed as accessible on providing equal access when it meets WCAG AA standards. And so that's our code that we go against. From a design perspective, any product that we make has to be thought about from how will people with no or limited vision use it? How would people without perception of color? Remember, 8% of males usually have color blindness, about 12% of females. How do people without hearing or limited hearing use it? People with no or limited vocal capability. People with limited manipulation or strength or limited reach. Photosensitivity and seizures. How do people with limited cognition or language or learning? We need to take that into consideration as part of our design requirements. And when we do think about all of these things, we come up with a better, more usable product for people. It's a simple benchmark of success. We need to ask ourselves along that way, can everyone easily perceive? In other words, can everybody either use their sight, their hearing, or their touch to be able to perceive that content and the controls? Is it simple to understand and use? And can anyone personalize how they use it? Now, let's think about this. It could be a digital book as an example. I can perceive that as text. I could select the text and have it read to me. So I've now got it available in two different ways. Is it simple to understand? We're looking at a reading age of somewhere between that of a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old. That's the language level that we want. And can you personalize it? Now, just like with a digital book, I can change the font size within a digital book without it affecting the meaning and the structure. So that's the level of personalization we're talking about. But they are our benchmarks of success. When you can, pardon me, perceive, it's simple, and you can personalize, then we've got something that is able to afford the dignity of independent and equal use to everybody. Thank you kindly. All righty, let's open it up for questions. Okay, or Jackie?
Hey, Greg, thanks so much for the talk just now. So we'll open the floor up now for questions. Does anyone have any questions now? You can type in the Q&A tab right now.
Just while people are typing, I'll talk about one of my other favorite features on my iOS device at the moment called live text. Now, why do I like live text? It means that any text that is sitting in an image, I can select that text and automatically now put that into a message or into any other form of communication, very simply and easily. If we think it was only 5 years ago that I was having to buy software that I could spend up to $2,000 for that software to independently scan, convert it. Now it's just part of the iOS device. And that's huge, that difference.
It's very interesting. So the first question we actually have is advice for any small, medium enterprises starting off with a product design who feel like they cannot afford to take accessibility into consideration.
I think we need to flip the question round. They can't afford not to take accessibility into consideration, because what they're doing, if you don't take it into consideration, you're limiting the reach of your potential product, and you want your product to reach the widest possible audience. So start to think about, if it's a digital product, it's starting to think about what are those web content accessibility guidelines and how do I put them in place? All of the major development platforms, so whether it's Android or the Apple ecosystem or Windows ecosystem, offer advice. They also offer free APIs. In other words, advanced programming interface, little Lego blocks that plug in that allow you to easily make an accessible product. And so it's thinking about, like, as a digital book, I could be using those features because I'm blind or vision impaired, but I could also want to have that book read to me while I'm madly preparing dinner, because all I've had to do is just go read the book to me. I've only had to use one line of code, like on my iOS, when I'm developing the app, because it's called the Accessibility API, because Apple makes all that features for free. Same as what Android does or Windows does. It's being aware that those APIs are made free by the developers. It's just knowing how to plug into those. And then thinking, so do I add labels to all of my images? Yes. Do I use proper paragraph? If it's a textual document, do I add proper heading structures like heading 1, heading 2, heading 3? Yes, I do. So adding accessibility is actually really cheap and easy, but it also means you're going to reach a bigger market. And tell me, who wants to limit the market size of their product? I don't. If I'm making somebody, I want everybody to use it.
I see. Okay, so the next question is actually, how can we better include people with disabilities into the design process? And also, how does, in a way, should we think of those designs based on ergonomics or accessibility in general?
Did you say ergonomics or economics?
Ergonomics.
Ergonomics. I think it's a mixture of both. It's the ergonomics and economics, but coming back to, depending upon what the design of what your product is, whether it's a physical product or a digital product, it's thinking about what's your market size and who do you want to reach. So for instance, if I look at a chair, like an office chair as an example, you'll notice that your office chair usually has the ability to be adjusted for its height. It has adjustments for also the angle of the seating, in a lot of cases, a whole range of things. Building that opportunity for people to personalize, because we're different sizes and shapes, means you've only got to build the one product because you've done the deep thinking up front, but you've built the one product that allows people to personalize it to suit their needs. So thinking about that diversity first allows you to come up with a better product. It's the same as here in Australia, there's been a range of people who originally might have built a house, a multi-level house, and they've found as they've got older, they go, I can no longer use the stairs. And we go, if we'd come up with a better design first off for you, you could have stayed in that house. Now they've got looking at expensive renovations or looking at how to change, changing where they live. So it has all these additional costs later on. So it's thinking about that. I would also, depending upon the product, go, who do I see as my market? Now, so for instance, if you're looking at seniors, if you're looking at anybody in the 50 plus range, we realize that all of those people will be experiencing some form of sensory or physical disability as they age. So how do I cater for that? That's the rich question that we need to think about. when we do that, we're actually going to come up with, again, a better product that will reach a wider market for a longer period of time. And that's the trick. But look at who your market is.
Okay, thanks for that. So the next question is maybe to follow up on that. When it comes to designing something, how do you actually balance the cost of adding more product, adding more functions? And also, how do you balance between getting a base load of customers first, then expanding the functions?
I think it's, if you think about this as a house, right? You think about your product as a house. If you come up with a standard design for a house, then you go, oh, that's our first design. Now we're going to renovate the house. We're going to come up with the next version. Each time you do those next versions of the house, it costs you more money. If you had actually thought about the design a little bit more, spent some more time on design thinking at the start, you can come up with a better design that is cheaper at the start. So as an example, back in 2000, I'll give you two examples. One is to do with a swimming pool. Now, this was to do with the Sydney Olympics. Now, at that time, they said, oh, we're going to build the pool for the standard Olympians. Then in 2 weeks, well, we're going to make all these major renovations. We're going to spend $5 million, as it was at the time, and have it ready for Paralympians. And we go, guys, if instead of having steps, if we just had ramps, everybody can use the ramps, whether you're an able-bodied person or you're a wheelchair user. So why don't we just put the ramps in for everybody and have a slow slope on it? That's the standard. So it ended up costing less money and was usable by everybody from the start. And that's the thing. It's thinking about, what's my design? So when we start to think about those features, so if I'm designing a new business app, part of my good design, it depends on, am I putting this out on an Apple device? Am I putting this out on an Android device? I would go and look at the free advice provided by those developers about how I can easily tap into the hard work that they've already done. So when we're saying, oh, here's the cost of those extra features, one line of code is not an extra cost. And that's the thing. It's us investing the time to realize what is freely available to us first. And so, for instance, if I was developing for iOS and macOS, on the Apple ecosystem, I would be going and having a look at all the free developers resources that are on the Apple developer website, which actually shows me how to do it cheaply and easily. As an example, Apple's Xcode, which is their preferred development environment, which they provide for free, it has machine learning involved in it. And so it will go, I noticed that you're building a button on your app. I think your button does this, and I think this is what the label should be. It does inbuilt accessibility testing as it goes. And that's where it's about choosing the right development environment, if it's a technological one. But it's actually cheaper and easier, but also thinking about that wider market. Because here's the other thing, when you say, oh, it'll come in version 2. Version 2 is always delayed. Version 2, here's the question. How do you want people to receive your product in version 1? Do they want them to go, oh, look, it's okay, but it's really buggy, and it can't do this, and it can't do that, and it can't do. I don't want people thinking my product can't do. I want people thinking my products can do. Because if people, their first interaction with my product is that they have a negative experience, all the research shows that they will then share that with their friends. Don't use this product because it has these limitations. So then you have to invest further money to counteract the negative impact that people have about your product. So in the end, it costs you a hell of a lot more. Design inclusively up front. Give your product a better chance and reach a wider market.
So actually, I think there's actually a follow-up question to that. So actually, what happens when a barrier is faced in which we are unable to actually encompass and be inclusive towards all the communities? Do they make a trade-off? And what should one do in this case?
There are, if I go back and look at all of those things where I said, how do I help people with limited reach, limited and no vision? There's a whole range of things. And I listed all those diversities of peoples. The answers to how I can support that broad range of people are things that they share a lot of things in common. So when I think about a person who might have a vision impairment or is blind, or a person who has low cognition, or a person with a physical disability who has trouble controlling the device, providing the capacity for them to have the text read to them, they all benefit from that. And that's the thing. It's when I start to unpack what are the solutions for that broad range, my solutions come down to about 10 things I can do that I know reaches this wide audience. And this is where when I go back and say to people, you've got to look at what your development tools are. So when earlier on I said, people have made assumptions about their community, but then they haven't thought about what are the tools that they're using. So that's why, if you're not a member of the Apple developer community, if that's what you're designing in that digital space, become a member. Just go and visit the site now. It's free. You can get additional resources if you're a paid member, but so much stuff is available there for free. The same with the Windows developer and the Android one. It's there for free. Invest in that free advice and you'll be able to go, oh, right, I can do that, that, and that. And I can reach a wider range of people. The same as when you go, I'm going to make my buttons a little bit bigger because it'll help people with low vision. It'll also help people who have fine motor, particularly older people, to control it. It'll also make it simpler. So there are things when we start to go, this is the need of this group, and this group. Oh, they all need the same thing. It's just that they need it for different reasons.
Oh, I see. So actually, can you share if you actually have any personal experience working on an inclusive project, and also maybe share about the challenges that you faced and the learnings that you had?
Yeah, for sure. So hang on, just my AirPod's coming up. So at the moment, one of the things that we're doing here in the state that I live in here in New South Wales is looking at digital identity. And so the question comes down to all the feedback that we've got, the research from people say, I'm sick of putting the same information in twice. So what we've done is allowed people to create a digital identity. And so what it would then mean is that when you log on, if I'm now applying for a driver's license or a boating license, or I'm applying for any one of the products that our New South Wales government provides, if it knows who you are once, you don't need to put that information in multiple times because we've connected that information there. So it goes, it's Jacqueline. Right, I know Jacqueline's name, I know her address, I know her date of birth because she's already put it in just once. That saves down on errors, it saves down on time, but we go, here are the range of services that we offer. But it's just, let's do that once. It's also down to, here in Australia, one of the things we've also adopted the European standard on accessibility requirements in procurement. So the United States, all of Europe, and now Australia are using the one set of procurement standards. So nowadays, for a company to be considered for to sell into any of our levels of government, their product has to meet accessibility requirements. And so one of the things is that we have sat down on a project to say, this is what it means for any product. So whether it's a telephone, whether it is a digital book, whether it is a website, here are the standards you've got to meet. I think the other one we've just done as an example is the pedestrian crossing. So I'm going to go to a physical example. Now, in Australia, when you would come to a pedestrian crossing, you would see the traffic light, and there would be the button that you would touch, and that button would then indicate that you needed to cross the road. It would then start beeping to you, wait, and you'd see the light flashing saying it's nearly time for you to cross the road, but also it would be beeping to give you an auditory indicator if you were unable to see the light on the other side of the road. As a COVID response, we went, we don't want people touching the buttons all the time. We also know that those buttons create a problem for a whole range of people. It's actually cheaper if we remove the physical button and put a proximity sensor. So now all you need to do is walk up to that traffic light and stand near it. That proximity sensor goes, that I noticed there is a person there, I will automatically say, tell the light that I need a person wants to cross. It's cheaper to have a proximity sensor than have the physical button, because the other problem with the physical buttons was that, or a mechanical button, is that they could get stuck at times. But what we've now made is something that is safer. And it also means, because it's a proximity sensor, you go, if I have a physical disability and I'm unable to get my arm up to touch the button, I don't need to worry about that anymore. I've just got to roll up in my chair and I'm there. I could be a parent who's trying to hold on to young children and shopping and everything else. I've just got to go and stand in front of the sensor. I could be an older person who's using a mobility device to get across the road. I don't need to touch it. I can keep control and keep myself upright with my walking frame. I just got to stand near the sensor. All of those things, but that simplicity of design and rethinking about how you interact with it, it saved money, but it also made us safer from a COVID perspective, because we'd got rid of the touch capability, but what we'd also done is made it more usable for everybody.
I see. So the next question is actually, during the user testing process, sometimes people with disabilities, especially the elderly, might have fears or concerns to adopt a new technology or product. So do you have any experience in getting those people to be more open to adoption?
Yeah, look, it comes down to the simplicity of the design and also the purpose of the design. As an example, when I'm looking at some products, the first thing is, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? You've got to ask yourself, am I creating a new product just because it's going to be gee whiz, and now I'm going to try and convince people to use it because I think it's exciting? Or is the product actually solving a problem? And that's the first question you need to ask yourself. And then, because that's going to help you, if you've been working with people with disabilities or older people as part of the design process, you now understand what their problem is. And so that what you're coming up with is a solution that's going to make it easier for them. If you can't do that, that's not their fault, that's your fault, because you've designed badly. And that's where you've got to come back and go, here's the problem. So if I'm looking at COVID check-in as an example here. So what we did here in Australia, like particularly in New South Wales, we had an app on all of our phones, and it used the inbuilt camera, and out the front of every shop was a QR code. Now, as you went, if you were entering that shop, you used your phone to, and particularly that app, to grab a picture of that QR code. It then said, right, I know that Jacqueline's in this store and she came in at this time. All we had to do was put the camera up, the phone up in front of that. And then I was able to go, yes, I'm entering, and then I can just hit the button to check out. That was fine for people who actually owned a phone. But we also had a range of people, because for economic reasons, didn't own a phone or had problems using a phone. So what did we do? We came up with just a physical card with a QR code on there. So it was the reverse. They just, because most of our retailers had QR code readers, could just scan the card under there and it automatically registered the person. But coming up with two solutions that were able to resolve that problem for us. But it's really important to make sure that your product is actually reaching a need in the first place. That's how you can sell it. But you've got to spend the time up front. That's the cheapest and easiest time. Come up with your idea, but go and talk to your end customers at the front. Bring them in at the start, because that, one, you'll have a better product, but two, when you design or you do it, they'll be the ones who can then be your best advocate for the product. And that's the thing. You want them to be your advocate. You don't want them to be somebody who goes, nah, don't worry about them. They don't know what they're talking about. They didn't consult. They've come up with something it's easy for a 20-year-old to use. It's not easy for somebody who's in their 50s or 60s to use.
So actually, since you also said on that part of advocating, actually, it's actually quite hard for, how do you actually, sorry, let me rephrase my question. Do you have any advice on getting prototyping or feedback from those users? Because everybody is so unique, you can't really, it's hard to include everyone. So which type of group or users should they reach out to first?
Look, you need a diverse range of users, but I think there are different ways that you can do it. Depending upon the product, whether it's digital or physical, in some cases you might need to bring people in. One of the things, it's also looking at, how do you pay people for their time? Right? You can't just expect people to come for nothing. You're devaluing that person. You're asking for their input. So one of the things that we look at is, how do we pay people for their time? We also then work with our key disability groups. So it might be our New South Wales Council for Intellectual Disabilities or our Blind Citizens Association. So we work with those groups to identify people that who are willing to look at our products and to participate in that process. As New South Wales government, because we have a range of staff who have disabilities themselves, we use those internal people as part of our design and discussion groups. We also look at different software. You might want to look at, say, something like Descript, and I'm just going to put that in the chat pod. Now, this is a really cool piece of software. So one of the things that you could be engaging with customers like we are now via Zoom or Teams or WebEx, any of your piece. That's fine. But what I want to do is record what's happening. Yes, I could do a screen recording in Zoom or Teams or whatever. The difference with Descript is that I can then start to select people. I can select those conversations. I can just select the text. So I can quickly annotate and grab bits of video from all the recordings that I've done remotely. So it could be, Jacqueline, you might be living in another part of Singapore. You could be living overseas, and you're participating in my user survey, and you have a range of different disabilities. You're familiar with your technology, and you're using whatever assistive technology that you want. All I'm going to do is actually record that session with your permission. So I've got that feedback. I'm going to then use something like Descript, because it's a brilliant program for simply editing all the user interaction video that I've got. It's a far quicker and cheaper way of doing that, but in conjunction with Zoom and Teams. But here's the thing, if you're working remotely, please make sure that, okay, I'm using AirPod Pros, but whatever you're using, please wear a microphone, please wear a headset, because for instance, if I'm using Microsoft Teams, which has inbuilt live captioning, that captioning, no matter what I'm using, it's working on whatever the quality of the audio is. So I want to give that captioning service the best audio. So I'm going to wear a microphone and a headset. It also means that if I've got participants in my group, I want them to have that best audio. I don't want them hearing the dog barking outside or other, bits and pieces or other things. Good headset makes a huge difference. But Descript is the way to do it. But certainly come back, look, work with your disability groups, but look at paying people. Pay them for their time. You would do that with any other piece. Now you can, we pay people, sometimes with money, other times it's different products depending on what it is. But yeah, we value them as citizens, so we value their time, so we pay them for it. That's a cost of the development cycle.
I see. So just now you mentioned about the proximity sensors.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very great example. And actually, how did you guys do the cost analysis on it? Like changing all the buttons to the sensors actually sounds like a lot of upfront cost to change them. And also the sensors require maintaining.
Yeah, I mean, so do the physical buttons. So it looked at, but it's also what's the cost in the transmission of potential disease, because you've got people who are may not necessarily be wiping their hands when they touch the button. And so we're looking at, in this case, it was a COVID response. And so in the end, we went, one day in hospital is worth how much money? It's huge. And so what it became was, first off, a simple process of all of the ones that go through a cyclic maintenance program, when we went, we need to do a replacement of that piece. Let's not repair the existing piece, let's replace that module. So it actually became cheaper to just take the old module off, put the new module on, then because we're going to have to put a new module on, whether it was physical or a sensory one. And so the sensors are really cheap. They're cheaper in a lot of cases than the physical parts.
See.
We make these assumptions. Oh, it must cost a lot. You go, no. Go and do your research. You'll actually find it's cheaper.
Yes.
It's the same as now in the design of new buildings, when you start to look at what are we doing with allowing an Internet of Things or smart connected homes. Now, I use Apple's, I've got a HomePod, but my HomePod also, and I've got a smart doorbell, I've got a smart lock on my door. They're things that go, oh, yes, you've spent X amount of dollars. I go, yeah, but what it's done for, as an example, a lot of people who are older or people who have physical or sensory disabilities, it's meant that they can stay within their own house. So what was the cost of moving that person into care? There is an individual cost, but there is a societal cost. So for the price of, say, $5,000 to fully automate their house compared to putting them into care, you go, it's far cheaper, but it also gives them that dignity of independence. We also know that all the research shows us that if people can live independently in their own house, they have a higher life expectancy. They have lower mental health costs. There's a whole range of other cost mechanisms. So it's not just looking at the physical cost of the product. It's doing the real cost benefit analysis on a broader range of things. And that's when you go, hey, yeah, it is far cheaper to do it that way. But it's also something from a social justice perspective as well, which is also really important.
So the next question actually is, with regards to user testing, are there actually any guidelines about how much they should pay to the user, how many people they should test with, and the amount of time they should test their prototype?
Okay, one, it depends on whether it's a digital or a physical product. For instance, on a digital product here, we will have about 10 different people per product. What we'll try and do is look at people who have getting representatives of different disability groups, so that we've got somebody with either sensory or physical or cognitive needs. We've tried to look that we've covered those bases. What should you pay them? What would you pay? Well, the value of that depends on, are you going to give them product in kind? Are you going to give them money? So we might look at some places, they'll go, we've done an interview with you. What we might do is give you an iTunes card worth $30 for an hour of your time. If you were looking at somebody who was a basic kitchen hand, right? Somebody who is just, pick somebody who you're getting that base level of advice from, like, or a base service from. It could be a minimum wage. That's what you might offer as for user testing.
Okay. So the next question actually is, how does one do more in regards to diversity education for their company? Could you actually share some experiences on creating a more inclusive work environment?
Here's the question. As I said in the piece, that everybody will have a disability if they live long enough. So the question comes down, all organisations want to attract and retain the best possible staff. The question is, are your processes and systems such that you can attract and retain staff? So could Stephen Hawking, if he was alive, as the professor of physics, there he was with motor neurone and he was in a wheelchair, could he work at your place, or would you reject him? That means that you have lost the brilliance of that person. Could Stevie Wonder, as the musician who is blind, could he work at your place? Or does your systems and processes preclude that? Now, think about everybody will have suffer impairments of some sort as they get older. So I've now invested all this money, time and money, keeping this staff. I've got this expertise. Oh, they've now got a physical or sensory disability. Does that mean that my systems and processes mean that that person will go elsewhere because I'm not inclusive? So that's why when we look at it, we go, we want to attract and retain. So we always say, when somebody comes to look at Microsoft as an example, they will say, anybody who comes to work for them, what do you need to do your job to the best of your ability? It comes down to that simple question. Oh, I need a height adjustable chair or table, or I need my computer to be able to talk to me. Go, yeah, we've got all those features. It's the same as Apple will do the same. All major companies that are really smart do that. They'll then go, oh, so you've now, Jacqueline, you might have somebody who's now got a younger person such as yourself who's decided to go mountain climbing or skydiving or whatever, and you've now broken your leg or you've broken your arm and you can only now do things with one hand. Now, is the design of your company one such that we go, oh, okay, that's all right. That's not an issue because we made sure that the equipment that we bought for everybody from the start could be easily personalized. We also now have systems in place. We go, oh, you need to dictate because you can't use your hands at the moment. That's fine. Here's the inbuilt dictation features that are on Mac OS or your iOS device or things like that. I want my staff, not only I want to attract, I want to retain, I want them happy, I want them productive. That means that we enable people to personalize their work environment. That's a benefit to the organization. Think about what does it cost an organization with staff turnover? It's worth an absolute fortune. One, you've lost that expertise. You've then had to invest money in recruiting somebody. You've then had to invest additional money in getting them up to speed. Why have all that cost? Look at how you do that. And by the way, for your regular performance reviews, as part of that process, you should be asking people, we're doing a performance review. Okay, great. Now, what do you need to do? What do you need to do your job to the best of your ability? It's a regular question that we always ask. And it's looking at when that simple thing makes a huge difference. That's the simple and easiest way of doing it. But it's an inclusive journey. So all of your documents should be made to accessible standards. Right, so for instance, like I'm on my Mac, but I'm using Microsoft Office as an example. Under the review tab on Microsoft Word, you will see check accessibility. Just like I spell check and grammar check my documents, I accessibility check my documents before they leave my desk. It's a professional responsibility that includes people. They're little things that we do, but they all add up piece by piece. But it starts with senior executive going, we want a diverse workforce. Why? We want our workforce to reflect our society, and our society is diverse. If we're going to reach all of society, we need to reflect it.
Okay, so actually we are close to, actually we're past 12 right now.
That's all right.
Yeah, is it all right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so actually the next question will actually be, with regards to the last question, how can we actually redesign job roles and job environments?
Okay, let's think about what we've done from a COVID perspective. If I'm looking as an example here in Australia, a lot of staff with disabilities were looking at flexibility and how they worked pre-COVID. Suddenly when COVID hit, we're going, oh, we're now going to have work from home. We're going to do this hybrid or remote working, and everybody started to do it. And you go, now that as we come out of COVID, hybrid is the new way. Hybrid is the way that everybody's going to be working. So it's looking at how do I build flexibility into that role? And that's the key. If I'm looking at the Microsoft research, also the other economic research coming out, we know that around the world, about 40% of the working population are looking at changing jobs because they've gone, you know what? I'm reassessing my work-life balance. So part of this is, how do I build in flexibility? And that could be, one, it's making sure that I buy the appropriate office equipment for people, such as your iPhone and your iPad. So like for here in Australia, like in New South Wales government, we don't have a physical landline phone anymore. Everybody just has an iPhone, and that phone has a dual SIM. So it can operate as a single landline or as a mobile phone. It also means that We can use the inbuilt accessibility features on that phone. It also means if the person is working from home or they're working in a physical location, it doesn't matter. But that good procurement decision enables flexibility in how we work. It allows us to have a more diverse workforce. It's then thinking about, I know that I will always have inclusive meetings now. So how do I, as I said, whether it's Teams or Zoom or whatever, making sure we go, you know what? Can you please make sure you've got all your presentations and your documentation ready before the meeting? Can you make sure that it's properly spaced out? And we set design requirements on that. So for instance, we say every document has a line spacing of 1.5 rather than a single line spacing. Why? Because we know it improves everybody's reading efficiency, but it also supports people with reading difficulties. We also use proper paragraph styles like heading 1s and heading 2s. All of those little things all add up to making it a flexible working environment that supports a wide range of people with different disabilities. We also have flexible hours. So in New South Wales government, you can start somewhere between 7 a.m. usually in the morning and 10 a.m. You've then finished within certain hours. There's a core bandwidth in the middle, but what we're saying is you will do your 35 or 40 hours a week, but we've got some flexibility. You will discuss that with your team manager and your team environment, but we will build in that flexibility for you. Flexibility and personalization are key for supporting a broad range of staff. But from a procurement perspective, it's looking at what you buy. Why buy things that aren't going to fit the needs of all your workers? Buy smart, in other words, buy accessible products that you know that all of your staff members can use depending upon their needs and their age and the situation. That's really, really the big difference. But it's recognizing that diversity is the norm. It is not the exception. And that's the biggest mind shift we need to get across to people too. The other one in there is that disability is designed. I have a visual impairment. My left eye is a prosthesis, right? A piece of plastic, and I'm legally blind in the right eye. It is the design of the environment. In other words, if somebody is doing a PowerPoint presentation and it's really small type and it's really hard to read, that disables me. The same as if they didn't give me a copy of the presentation ahead of time so that I could have it read to me by my device. They're the things that disabled me. Remember I said disability equals impairment plus barriers. I have a visual impairment. Those barriers that have been designed around me are what disables me. And that's the big shift. It's going, okay, if you are the one in charge of designing something, whether it's a procurement process, a recruitment process, a new app, a chair or whatever, you're the one who decides who can use it and who can't. So you have a responsibility to look at how you include, not exclude. And that's the big shift.
I see. So to wrap it all up, the last question I will ask for today is, what made you advocate for accessibility, and what can the audience here today say for, what can audience here do today for inclusion and diversity?
Okay, so what got me into it? One was my own visual impairment, because I was looking for solutions for the barriers that I was confronting, particularly earlier in my life. What is it that we take away? It is that simple equation. Disability equals impairment plus barriers. Disability is designed. Everybody has a disability. So how do I design to include? And when we realize the numbers that are there, everybody wins out of that process. It's not this mythical 1% or 2%. It's the whole population benefits from that. And so it has huge value for us. I think that's the biggest thing. But yeah, now when I talk about disability equals impairment plus barriers, that is also working on the model that is used by the United Nations in the Convention on Rights with People with Disabilities. That's what the definition within there gets distilled down to. It's what the World Health Organization uses. It's just that too many of our population have an outdated medical model of disability. We've just got to go to the social model. And as colleagues around the world will say, when we embrace more of the social model, we actually come up with better solutions because we look at those needs of people and come up with more innovative products. So when you include from the start, you will innovate. And innovation leads to prosperity for everybody in that process.
Okay, so thank you guys for all the wonderful and thought-provoking questions. And also thank you, Greg, for answering every single one of them wonderfully. Yeah. As we will want to keep others from his lunch and Greg for your tea time, we would like to end the webinar here. We apologize if you haven't managed to cover your questions, but if you have still any questions, you can still feel free to contact Greg. So Greg, if it's actually all right with you, could you share your screen with your contact email in the last slide?
Yes, certainly. I'll do that again now. Let me just play from that current slide. There you go.
So
it's all ALL.equal, EQUAL at iCloud.com. You can get me at Twitter at iBuddha, IBUDDHA, and there is my phone number, +614 03 273 063. But it's best to try the email or Twitter.
Okay, thank you. So before we actually end today's session, maybe do you have any closing thoughts for today's session, Greg?
Look, I just advocate for inclusion. Just as I said, everybody, diversity is the norm. So we're going to come up with simple solutions that will solve for one, extend to many. That's the big message for everybody.
Okay. So everyone, before we end today's session, we would actually like to highlight our upcoming Tech for Good Festival, which is our annual innovation challenge that celebrates the use of technology and in helping people with disabilities and also for the elderly to live a life of opportunities. So that's happening on the 6th of November. Do not miss it. You can actually scan the QR code on the screen now for more information on our festival day. We'd love to see you then. So we have come to the end of our session today. Thank you, Greg, for the wonderful talk and the informative Q&A session. And from everyone here at Engineering Good, we would like to wish you a good weekend and thank you for your support for Tech for Good thus far. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you kindly. Take care.